Very good afternoon to all of you. On behalf of the Center for African, Latin American and Caribbean Studies at the Tyndall School of International Affairs, I would like to extend a warm welcome to all of you. I would like to particularly thank the contribution of Professor Karin for putting this event together. I'm very delighted to welcome a very dear friend of me personally, but more importantly, as somebody who has seen through the growth and evolution of Indian media for so many decades, and a truly significant figure in the larger growth and evolution of Indian media, Mr. Chengappa, the Group Editorial Director Publishing of India Today Group. I can say this about him, that there are few individuals who transcend their organizational affiliations and identity, and they are in many ways representing the larger cause for which they have spent a substantial part of their life. And Mr. Chengappa belongs to that type of individuals who has made such outstanding contributions towards the growth of free speech in our country, but more importantly, to uphold the values of ethics and independent journalism in India. So we are very, very delighted that he has accepted our invitation to be here. I'm not going to read his bio, it's with all of you, but what I can say is that he epitomizes what is possible in the context of the future of media and journalism, and we are very delighted to be hosting him right as we begin the process of establishing the 6th school of our university, the Tyndall School of Journalism and Communication. I am grateful to him for taking time out from his precious schedule with elections happening in many parts of India, but also sort of in this world of constant 24 hours news situations. For him to come to our campus and to engage with all of you reflects his larger commitment to institution building and the importance that he attaches to education and the kind of work that our faculty and students are here doing. So with those few words, I now invite Mr. Chengappa to deliver his talk on the role and impact of the media on foreign policy.
Thank you, Raj. I see we share a first name, and you should have been in the School of Diplomacy, actually, with that speech. But I'm delighted to be here and talking to all of you all. I'm not sure of the mix of this class and what level I'm sure it's much senior than I am in terms of understanding of foreign policy. And as Raj was mentioning, being an editor, I have to keep switching tracks. So it's not like I'm hard focused on foreign policy, although the current cover story in India Today is written by me. But I was just in Varanasi yesterday and the day before to witness democracy in action. And if any of you all had time to go down to see an election, you would have come back quite heartened by what you saw in Uttar Pradesh, particularly Varanasi, where everything was back in full form. You know, there were crowds, there were flags, there were jingles of popular songs of Bollywood mixed with it. There were huge rallies and people came out, and there were politicians who were speaking about the programs they should be doing, including the Prime Minister and the current Chief Minister of Uttar Pradesh, and of course the ever the Prince in waiting, Rahul Gandhi. He was also there in this rally. So it's a different world out there. And to come back to suddenly to speak on foreign policy is a bit disjointing, because right now the focus is on multiple issues that are there. I'd only say a few words, and then possibly we can take questions so that I can answer specifically what you'll know. I can talk for, on a lot of subjects. So I would restrict to say that I think in terms of media and foreign policy, firstly, in a light-hearted way, many of us took to foreign policy because we get to travel a lot. And in the good old days, for Indians to go abroad was quite something. So this was the sort of, just like the Foreign Service was the privileged beat, or the privileged cadre for government servants. So whoever topped the civil service examinations, the first preference was given to them to join the Foreign Service. Quite similarly, in terms of journalism, people that wrote on foreign policy normally opted for it after coming back, say, from studies abroad, and where they could talk on larger policy issues that were there. So in that sense, it was quite an exclusive group for a long time, and many of them became editors of various papers, and then also became diplomats. The former Tribune editor-in-chief, one of the most outstanding editors, Mr. Prem Bhatia, was also a diplomat in various countries. And although journalism and diplomacy don't go together, because we are supposed to speak our minds, unlike diplomats who hold back and are more gentle with the truth. And there's been Kuldeep Nair, who was also another great journalist of the past, who was also a diplomat. We've had H.K. Dua more recently, also a former editor of the Tribune, who was a diplomat. Though I was editor-in-chief of the Tribune for 5 years, I haven't crossed sides and moved to the other side of it. So that was the kind of setting, a historical setting in which foreign policy was covered in this. And they were brilliant writers and reporters. But I think what has happened over a period of time, and that is because of initially we were restricted with a lot of the, I would call it the shibboleths of the past, in the sense that there was the non-aligned movement, which I'm sure all of you all would have read, where India was somewhat a leader in that process. And we had a high moral ground for all the issues. Africa, for instance, we supported a lot of the freedom struggle over there. In Brazil and Latin America, we built relations over a period of time. We also had common colonial bondings or bondage in that sense. Since I'm told there's a lot of Latin American students here as well. So there was a common sharing of it. And of course, with it came all the common problems that these developing countries faced, which was poverty, crime, illiteracy, all the big development issues that were there that we could find common cause with. And so therefore the United Nations and other major bodies assumed an importance in the plans of India as it dealt with other countries, because we could identify with some of the problems. We needed the funds, so we needed the giant institutions across the world to leverage those funds. It was better we lobbied together than to do it individually. So symbiotically, over a period of time, we developed our own relations. But I think things began to change by the mid-90s, particularly our relations with Africa and Latin America as well. I mean, in Africa, you could see there was deep disappointment after South Africa, the black South Africa came to power. And I happened to cover the elections, the famous elections where Mr. Nelson Mandela won. I think it's 1995 or 94. Date certainly, this thing, I think 95. 94? 95? 94, right. 94. And of course, that was a historic sort of thing for a journalist to cover. And I still remember that we waited 3-4 days for the election results to come out. And I was in Johannesburg. The Carlton Hotel was where we all assembled every night. Though I think that are you from South Africa, sir? No. Okay. I don't know. What's the total electorate? I can't remember the size of that electorate at that time, but it was certainly smaller than Delhi or a little larger than one of the Indian states. And they, because democracy was coming for the first time over there, they took something like 3 days to count what we would have counted in about a couple of hours. I mean, it was a new experience for them. So every night we assembled in Carlton Hotel and we danced and we drank, and there was all the great leaders, South African leaders there, including Ramaphosa, those days, all the big guys that were there. Mr. Mandela, of course, finally came on when the results were announced, and the most important thing was, sorry, this is my lunch. So the most important thing then was that, once the results were announced, you would have to watch the National Party then lower, the white party that ruled South Africa, lower the flag. And that was to be in Pretoria. And so if you could do both together, you would watch history. And that seldom happens to a journalist. when that happened. So I found out from Mandela's office that he would speak at 7 o'clock. It was a big risk to go to Pretoria because you wouldn't want to miss the action. When Mr. Mandela, actually, if you go back and you play some of you all should do that. When you play that, you see Mr. Mandela dance at that particular function where, for the first time after almost 70 years, a black majority rule takes over. So no one would want to miss that opportunity to see him. So I took a risk because it was very difficult to find out when Mr. Mandela would come. But they said he'd come at 7, and Pretoria is about an hour's drive from there. So I drove at about 4:30 or 4 o'clock to Pretoria to see the White National Front actually lower its flag, and the kind of tears and everything else which you could see there. Pick Botha, all these great leaders that were there at that time, de Klerk, all of them talking about giving up power. And then to drive back and witness the famed dance of Mr. Mandela and see a black majority take charge of Africa. I mean, that's history. You watch it at close quarters. And when reporting back to your readers or to, these days, television in a huge way, you will then understand the kind of what is the import of what you're writing. You're writing history at short notice. This is going to be recorded for posterity, and the way you present it, and why is Africa important? Now, that's the other thing we always need to face when we are writing about or understanding the role of the media in foreign policy, is that, it's almost blasphemous to ask, is why should India be interested in South Africa, for instance? I mean, why should you study what we do with South Africa? I mean, I know some of you all from School of International Relations, so in any way you've got the blinkers on and you're supposed to study it. But why should we? I mean, why should a common reader who's walking the streets of Sonepat or Haryana want to know what we're doing with South Africa? Apart from a kind of an interest to say, oh, so-and-so has come to power. What's the relevance? Or, it can be as why would Syria and what's happening in Syria be of any great interest to India? Or why would we be bothered about Brazil and the change of power or the impeachment of a particular leader? How does it bother India? And you can go even further. You can say, why does Brexit bother us? Why does Europe bother us? Essentially, this is a question we used to ask in journalism, which is, who gives a damn? This is more I won't get to the more cruder version of that, which I'm sure all you students use out here. But so that is an essential question that needs answering. Whenever you handle foreign policy or any complex subject that's there, do not presume that the other person knows the subject well. That is, he or she is fully aware of the implications or the import of why a particular relation is important. And as we have seen, and we are seeing it unfolding, we have seen how President Trump came to power, and how perception is very important in a lot of these things. And public perception of what is going wrong or right, however esoteric foreign policy is a very important determining factor of how a government will run foreign policy. It is how you project a particular event, a relation, that actually adds importance for a leader to go ahead and do what he's doing. Apart from the strategic part, which only a few people know, you need to also present why such a relationship is important. And if you look at what is happening, because we've just done President Trump on it, the question that I asked was, in this cover story was, how do you deal with this gentleman? Here's a president who's come to power. He, in some sense, is going to start impacting India. Some of y'all, who would like to go and work in America, for instance, who would like the famous H-1B visa, which entitles you to work there and earn a salary and stay on for 3 years. So how is that going to be impacted? And of course, Latin American, African countries are also on the same, putting their names in the hat to head to America. Then what happens to the fact that he's changing the world order? Now, are there benefits of that? Or are there perils of that? So if Mr. Trump decides, and we've quoted, I think, Shiv Shankar Menon, who says it quite nicely, that he calls it the 3 Ds what Mr. Trump would do, which is deglobalize, disrupt, and I think there is one more D, which good, disengage. So that's the one that we need to look at. When you see that he begins to unravel 65 years of accepted American order and dominance across the world, it may not impact you and me directly as it does with an H-1B visa does. But again, we have to understand, so how does that bother me? If you're going to convey it to large audiences who then form a perception which then influences the leader in charge of foreign policy, in most cases the prime minister or president of a country. So one needs to understand the implications of that. So when you take, if you're saying disengage, then what was India's relations, say, with the US before that? What was US's world relations in terms of how they approached the world, in terms of the dominance they played either in military and economic or other affairs, soft power as we've known it to be? And how is that going to be impacted? And how does that impact us in India, in Latin America, in Africa? What is the change a personality like Mr. Trump would? And it's very important that the media gets out there and writes and talks to as many people as possible. So what you tend to do in this is that many times these days, because of the dramatic shifts in terms of the way media is now dispensed and reaches you all. Most of you all, I'm sure, don't pick up a newspaper, am I right? Yes? No? How many read newspapers in the morning?
He's talking about physical paper.
Actually hold the paper. So just a hand count here, you'd see that barely 8 or 9 people, and this is a school that is supposed to be looking avidly every day at what the hell is happening across the world, right? So that's a good indication of why. I mean, if you're not interested, you can imagine what the rest of the country is also doing. So the way information is now being dispensed is either you're watching television. How many of you watch television news in the night? 1, okay.
Web,
2.
web is what you know.
Yeah, so your major source of information, I would gather, was your WhatsApp and your Facebook and your Twitter, right? Right? And you think, wow, I'm truly clued in. Anytime, any place, anywhere, I get information. If one guy is killed, a Sikh is killed in the US, I know it because Twitter is flashing it, right? But what you're also subjected to is a tremendous chaos of information, where personal opinion is mixed with genuine reporting. You're not sure of the credibility of this. You would hear items that come out to say that there's going to be an earthquake of this magnitude, or the world's going to come to end as predicted in 2017, and you can wish your parents goodbye and whoever else you'd like to. 2, there is no way of verifying a lot of this information that comes, whereas in the past, the media meant responsibility, accountability, credibility, where if, say, India Today wrote about something, you'd say, believe it, because I think India Today writes, talks to the right people and conveys information to me. Today, it could be a friend that is tweeting something and you think, that's more important. It's, much of public affairs and foreign policy is determined as much as opinions are formed, as much as you're going and watching a movie and you're saying, what's the latest X-Men movie? Logan, right? Good movie, bad movie. And your friends tweet about it and you think, yeah, sure, I'll go and watch it. Somewhat like that, foreign policy is sort of determined not only in this class here, which is supposed to, in some sense, specialize in public affairs and understanding of international affairs or other kinds of things, as well as outside. So you have a genuine problem of communicating what is essentially very boring information. Foreign policy is a lot of jargon, a lot of numbers, we have signed 20 agreements, 30 agreements with Brazil, so who cares? I'm sorry, I didn't mean it that way. I just came. Why not just go to Rio de Janeiro, one of the beaches, and say, yeah, okay, this is better. That's more like foreign policy. But
the difference between India and Latin America are much larger than many neighboring countries and traditional players. So this is possibly one of the reasons.
Maybe. I mean, tourism is a great sort of attraction and great entry point for foreign policy issues, which is good. I mean, lots of countries survive on tourism, and because of that, their foreign policy also develops in a particular manner. But coming to, so I think the problem we confront is not just the media's role in foreign policy, but people's role. Those who are studying it, the academics, to de-jargonize everything. Now, for instance, I was just mentioning to Karen that I attended the 1992 Rio Summit. Now, for those who weren't born at that time, and I'm sure a lot of y'all were not born at that time, right? That was the starting point for what you now call climate change. Okay, that was the mother that began the whole process, that gave birth to a lot of agreements and protocols that now determine and shape the way we deal with climate change, which is now about to be destroyed by Mr. Trump if he says no to climate change. Okay, but that was the construct. Now, when we were reporting climate change, now this is a foreign policy issue, by the way. What is a domestic policy issue then becomes an international issue. When I was reporting on India's development and environment, I went to some of the most beautiful parks, wildlife parks across the country, forested areas. I suggest some of you all please go there at some point to see what was really happening on the ground, why our forests were vanishing, what was the last preserves that were available. You'll see some of the most beautiful birds and animals, including the tiger and the lion and the giant hornbill. These are magnificent sights to see. And at the same time, you would see vast areas being denuded. If you go up to the Himalayas close by, you will see a lot of that. And we all understood that there was something seriously going wrong because water was a problem, land was an issue, soil contamination was an issue. The way crops and the productivity of crops was an issue. The fertilizers were an issue. The amount of poison you put on the soil to get rid of pests was an issue. So it was a huge battle. And and the amount that you have, because of industrialization, the amount of pollution you're putting out and carbon dioxide you're putting out was an issue. But when you actually went to the United Nations and you listened to UNCED, as it was called, UN Conference for Environment and Development, one of the most boring conferences. Everything was bracketed. That's the famous diplomatic word for undecided. So you would put a statement and there'll be 10 brackets. We, the world, believe that climate change is a problem and it is caused largely by the North, and by the South should be compensated for it. There'll be brackets in the North, brackets in the South, till the text is agreed upon. One of the most boring, barring the place. We loved Rio, so we spent most of the time on the beach. But barring that, it was one of the most boring conferences to be present, because primarily they were discussing brackets, and they reduced what we thought, what we smelt, we breathed, we saw the wonderful things and also the sad things that happened to environment were all reduced into jargon. Very boring stuff that you wouldn't want to read. I can give you the original unsaid documents. You please go onto the net. Try going through it. Some of the most turgid writing that you can ever see. Because everybody was covering their behinds with every little statement so that I will not be committed, right? So you had all the clauses and subclauses and everything else, and when you read it, you were too distant from environment. It didn't mean anything. There was, I still remember a Red Indian chief who came and spoke to us, not the Indian, the Holy Red Indian, but the ones that actually are the Native Americans, who spoke, and he spoke brilliantly. And he talked in a way, and the connect with nature, that all the journalists present, including me, were, weepy-eyed. We had tears in eyes, because he spoke of environment in a manner that was so brilliant and so understanding of nature, that those sentences moved public far greater than all your language. And if you see across, when you come to, say, more closer to our region, if you listen to Malayala, and you listen to what's happening in the Swat Valley or in Pakistan and handling the Taliban, that young girl's experiences where she shot because she wants to be different affects foreign relations more than anything else that might happen across. So we cannot forget why small things like that, even the individual matters. It's just not the large policy issues when we are handling foreign policy. The other things I'd like to briefly, because I know, we need to get to questions, and I wouldn't want to talk so that I can answer some questions from you all, is that understanding the issues. I think we don't understand issues anymore. We say we have to get oil from Nigeria. Okay, and ask anyone here, what percentage of our oil imports are from Africa, from Middle East, from the US, from Russia? And why is it so important to be doing business with Nigeria? Right? I'm just taking names off. Or Brazil, or Latin America, and we import a lot of ethanol from, in terms of fuel, or biofuels that are coming from there. So why do we get into agreements with any of these? What is the connect that you have from foreign policy to, like we say, from lab to land for the farmer? What is that connect that happens from policy to action on the ground? I think that's very important in foreign policy, is that we write about these large issues of, India signed 20 agreements with, South Africa, and it's to do this, and that. And everybody is saying, so what does it mean? It is translating a lot of those things. Then that's why I come back to the original theme of my talk, which is how do I connect disparate and boring statements and make it relevant to whoever the audience is here. And I think that is the challenge. So you say that requires for instance, if there's an opportunity like what we did during the Africa India Forum that happened, I think, a year or so back, a year and a half back, October 2015 or something like that, yeah. There again, we brought out a special, but then 12 pages, which just sort of explained, had about 8 or 9 experts talk about why Africa was important. Okay, what is the net trade that we had with it? What was the kind of business India did with it? Why was Africa important to us? Why was India important to Africa? What are the markets available in Africa? What could Indians do over there? What is the history of our relations? Putting it in perspective. And you will find that if actually, as you get deeper and deeper, and universities like Jindal would help a lot, is to actually specialize in certain areas so that you all become mini experts. You all can then advise the government as to, look, this is important, that's not important. This is what touches our core here. If he's going to Israel, for instance, and since you're in Haryana, it becomes very important if the Prime Minister is going to Israel, as he's planning to, as you might have seen in the daily papers, which you all don't read. But maybe it was WhatsApp to you all, it's by someone or Twittered in your accounts. If you all did notice that particular development, then the relevance of Israel to the farmer here and their drip irrigation technology and their advanced agriculture techniques. Because Israel is a small country. It had to produce food, so it learned the most innovative ways of growing food. And that was then being able to transport to us to understand how we could make productivity improve and save every drop of water, which Israel specialized in. So every country has a learning process that we could get, to understand and work on. You need to go now? So that's something I think we need to break down, is to understand why economics matters, why economic relations matter. What is the kind of, and by the way, when I was talking historically, today, economic relations is the greatest leverage nations have in terms of dealing with other countries. If you read the Trump piece, we talked of the fact that India is now is the world's largest importer of defense. If you get to Trump's attention, the best way to do it is say, look, I'm going to buy a couple of F-16s or F-18s from you, or F-15, sorry, from you, and that costs about $10 billion. Knowing that Mr. Trump is a businessman, he'd suddenly sit up and notice and say, oh, wow, that's great. My Americans can, since he says buy American, hire American, we are fulfilling the buy American, and he'll say, let's do business with India. So economic affairs is now one of the key determinants of foreign policy. And I think that's very important for the media to highlight what are the opportunities. So in terms of countries coming together, it's good that countries actually showcase. No more do you have to be sort of government about it, bureaucratic about it. I think that's changing considerably. Is how do you present India as ambassadors, or how does other countries present their countries and their virtues and their their abilities to do business with us. So I think that's a very, very important relationship. And if you look, span quickly the key areas. I mean, one, of course, is geopolitics, and that is directly linked with big issues. When you want nations to combine or form groupings, how are those groupings going to help? We've just seen the Trans-Pacific Partnership being trashed by Trump, but you've got other great partnerships that are happening currently happening there. So how do these trade groupings happening on the first round? How are these military alliances changing, and what's going to happen to them? So it's security. That's a big issue. If someone's going to attack me, who's going to come to my rescue? The atom bomb comes in. I've done a book on the bomb, which is a history of India's atomic bomb, but we'll talk about it at some other point of time. So that's a big, big area. Nuclear, security issues, linked with it, terror. How do you deal with terror? And terror now respects no borders. It crosses over to anything. We are great victims of terror. And we've, continuing to fight a great battle with Pakistan and trying to get them to stop putting the gun to our heads all the time. They want to negotiate with the terror gun. So that's a huge area. Then comes doing business with them, which is, since just prior to Trump, I think now we to say like BC and AD after Trump and before Trump. And if he goes ahead with the deglobalization process, we're all in a model that the world is one marketplace, that we are becoming increasingly global and local in the way we do things. Now that concept is changing with Brexit. Protectionist barriers are once again being built. Trump is going to be putting protectionist barriers. So how is that going to change it? So the marketplace, how is that going to impact? Then the dynamics. If Mr. Trump earlier, India was looked as a pivot in Asia to counter a rising China. If he's going to be engaging in a trade war with China, does India join the trade war? Does it sort of play now, finally we get you, kind of a game? Or we keep out? Because we never know, Mr. Trump, he'll sign a deal and we'll be left fighting with China. So do we then hold back? So it's a lot like the games you all play with your own relations, right? Foreign policy is only translated at a much higher level to what is personal relations. And each of these relations is a matter of win-win. Just as you would negotiate with someone, it's always a win-win proposition. And so the more people feel that both sides walk away from a negotiation where they both win, that relationship is likely to last. If one is an exploitative relationship and the other nation is about ready, it might tolerate it for a while, but as soon as it gets ready and gets stronger, it's going to say, bugger you. I'm not going to do what you're going to tell me, right? So that's just like what you do with your own relationships with your parents and with others, right? As you get stronger in your job, as you get this, you say, Dad, I'm not listening to you, okay? Fine, you paid my bill, all that. He has this great leverage over y'all, which he says, I've sent you all to college, you better study the way you'll want to. But over a period of time, you say, now I'm independent, I don't need it. Nations behave somewhat the same way. They're no different in terms of the way they behave. After all, when nations deal with each other, it's two leaders. So leaders are important. Their charisma, their ability to get along, their ability to talk to the other leader. Sometimes a personal relationship is more important in international affairs than all the other relations that happen in a country. So you have to judge that, understand the leadership style. So Mr. Modi is an aggressive, outward-looking leader who wants to engage. He wants to do a one-on-one with everybody. He doesn't like Mr. Manmohan Singh, want to shrink back from direct contact. He would like to go hug, embrace, do this. That's his style. It's a touchy-feely kind of approach to diplomacy. Okay, so each one has their style of how they would like to do it. So if you look at that, again, the changes that are happening, coming back to the theme, is that you're seeing the world undergo dramatic change. Currently, as you're sitting here, the world is changing so rapidly that we don't know what is happening. Okay, there's a great uncertainty that is set in foreign policy. Who's going to do what? Who's going to run the world? If America's not going to be the bulldog anymore, who else is going to take its place? Where does India fit in? Where does whichever country you come from fit in? How does it's going to leverage whatever it's going to do and do it? And these are very puzzling questions that need to be finally, I think, boiled down to the lay public, which says, why is a particular subject, why is this development important to me? What can India do, for instance, to handle Mr. Trump? Does it affect, as I said earlier, relations with China? How do we get Trump to handle Pakistan for us? Or how do we get, so sorry, touch it? No. How do we manage the H-1B restrictions? That's going to be announced later tonight. The immigration policy is going to happen later tonight by the President of the United States. So what happens to that? So all these are issues. My only suggestion to you all as I wind up this thing is keep it simple. Understand that foreign relations are like human relations. It's not like just two large countries that sit there and talk. Understand that there are, everybody wants something from the other person. What is that thing that you want from that country? Whether it's technology, whether it is you want to send exports to it, you've got surplus rice and you want to export basmati. So which countries would you like to export basmati to? And who are those countries that give you the best price, have the best deals? Do those countries have protection, measures to protect if I go and do business with someone? Do they have a proper legal system so that I can sue someone if he doesn't pay me the money? I mean, these are all concerns that are of foreign policy issues as well. What is my security when I land up over there? What is the ease of doing business, as many people keep saying? Do I have to go through a red tape or bureaucracy to get past all the customs and everything else? So that's also an issue that needs to look at. So it's all about people also. It's just not about policy. If you are able to break down foreign policy to people and how it matters to people in each of these countries and how you can build win-win relationships and understand that despite all the boring jargon, these are all very important things that matter to you and me, then I think we have the impact as we look at this, or the role of the media is somewhat fulfilled. But with these few words, I'd say thank you very much, and I'd open to questions. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Raj, for those really very thought-provoking set of reflections. I know I need to rush in a few minutes, so I'm going to just ask something and then have this continue for some more time. Raj, one of the things that I wanted to ask was that, and more in the context of India and Indian media, I've always felt that the Indian media has been pretty much so obsessed with what's happening within India, and its larger focus on trying to play an important role in influencing foreign policy has just been so limited. And I'm not talking about the big, when summits are happening, but as an influential institution to shape the foreign policy. Is it because of the inherent sense of timidity when it comes to dealing with the complexity of international affairs, or there's already so much going on in India that we really the appetite for people to, in a way, my larger question is that why we have not yet reached a stage where we could see a sort of an Indian Al Jazeera, some sort of an international media presence within India, which is homegrown and has a powerful opinion regarding foreign policy and international issues globally, of course, India too.
Good question. I think Arnab Goswami wants to do what you're wanting to do with the Republic, which he wants to now set up and start as a television station. So he wants to be a true sort of champion of our vantage point in international relations.
At least that was not his past, but yeah.
No, I don't think it's that Indian media is not focused on foreign policy and more focused internally. Yes, I mean every media is, because that's where our audience is. We're not reaching out to American audiences. We're not reaching out as India Today, for instance. If we are reaching out to American audiences, we're reaching out to non-resident Indians, right? So we address their interests. We're not reaching out to the Brazilian or the South African, or they don't even watch us. So why would we be chatting about those issues on our TV? Because our guys are going to say the same question that I asked you, is who gives a damn? So why should I know about all these things? How does it affect me? Why should I waste my time listening when I've got 100 other things, including watching a movie, watching channels, listening to nice, interesting videos, crazy videos that come on WhatsApp, which has a little joke or something else. That's more interesting to look at. Or if you look at what you do, these TED Talks or this, anything that's more interesting, you tend to do it. Because I think education is also in a great transition since, the whole business of chalk and blackboard classroom concept of education is also being questioned considerably, where people are saying, why the hell should we be sitting in classes and trying to do learning, and how, can I do something with multimedia and get to understand big issues? Do I have to really sit in a class? I think all of them have this question circulating through their minds. Do I have to spend 3 years studying something? These are all questions that are there. So I think, so one is relevance. A lot of these things you have to make relevant to your audience in the first part, and therefore domestic issues dominate. I wouldn't say that's great, because many of these domestic issues are either, take one headline and go through the day, like a rape or a crime that is committed, and there's a kind of voyeuristic kind of reaction to it, where everybody sort of goes after one story, and everyone competes to get the breaking news, and that's television. I think print is more responsible, more widespread in its thing. So if you read the daily papers, and India Today or any of the class newspapers, you would find that they do devote some amount of writing on foreign policy. I think the obsession is with the neighbors, which is quite rightly so, because you have a hostile neighbor in Pakistan, which is doing things to the country that people are interested in. There's the good old love-hate relationship, two brothers that, when the nations were born, and apart from each other, split apart, rendered apart, like true Hindi movies style, thrown apart, living different lives, different religions, different everything, then trying to get together again, form a relationship. So that's the melodrama of that. So there's a lot of, if you say, Pakistan's also foreign policy dealing with it, right? Or Lanka is, America is. So I think that we're interested in particular areas or countries that have a direct impact on it. China is, for instance, a lot of China reporting happens because for those who are, those of us who have seen or not seen, or at least been present or born when 1962 war happened and India was defeated in the war, border war, have memories of China, and therefore much of that begins to play out in relations when we deal with it. So in each of these areas, each one has a particular opinion and formulation. And therefore, to say an independent vantage point or viewpoint, it's welcome, but it's not business sense. Okay. The other word I just thought of, since it's a class here, is I hate to use this word. I know it's a very gender-sensitive word, but it's not sexy, right? To be talking about issues on relations with other countries. It's much easier for this generation to grasp the other kinds of issues, personal issues. Right? So people are more interested if, who was that singer, Rihanna's just having a baby, right? If you go into the tweets or this thing, who's the singer? Beyonce, yes. She came out and won the Grammy on this, right? More people watch the Grammy, right? Then they would say, watch whatever else is happening. You're connected in that sense with some foreign national who may not have directly impacted your life, but you are spending 10 minutes of your time going through something that may not directly be relevant to you, but you're interested. So it is that where the danger lies, okay? Where if you do not able to communicate this vast interest, this important subjects to an audience that is going to shape a nation, an audience that is hard fixated on media that is not credible, that is personalized, opinionated. They think that is where all the truth lies, but that's a jumble. There's a chaos that is happening. And then to try and say that let's make sense out of this is difficult. So this audience would say, particularly like if you sensationalize something, right? So if you wrote about the way this person was shot dead, Kuchibotla, whatever his name is, who was this, Andhra Pradesh. There'll be more people that'll read that, right? More of y'all will be thinking, should I be going to the US? That story has more impact than whatever else US does. It might sell F-15s or 18s or whatever it is.
Like it happened in Australia for a brief moment.
That's right, in a lot of things. So I think we have to understand how do we communicate in this very confused media world, that has emerged. Like everything else, this age of uncertainty that has hit us has affected the media and your reading and the way you'll assimilate information and the way you'll get information. Okay, you still have, of course, textbooks here and notes here and everything else, but where are you picking up your information? How authentic is it? So I think you're going through a cyclical change where at some point you'll come back and say, why am I wasting so much time on my Facebook? You know, maybe the first time I keep in touch with my friends, an old girlfriend or a boyfriend or whatever it is that you want to sort of, communicate with, see how they're looking, what they're doing, all that stuff. And then sooner or later you're saying, that's just sucking up half an hour of my time. I'm not getting what I want to get. So that, I think, is the point of growing up again, where you're going to say, I'm going to seek out information that makes sense to me, that is credible, that is top of the line, and I'm not going to waste my time on idle gossip and other kinds of things. So I think that transformation, when you begin to understand that the world begins to affect your life, you want to know why, and you want to know from credible sources.
All right, I'm sorry I need to leave, but
Sure,
I want to present a small token of appreciation for your visit, and then you can continue the...
What's this?
This is the official scarf of our university.
Thanks so much.
Good luck.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. This is good, even before I finish my speech. You like it so much. Yeah, sorry, go ahead. You were about to ask a question. You put up your hand? Yeah.
I was just saying that part of the reason could be,
Yeah.
and I'm not making a pitch here for the General School of International Affairs, but I find some of the reporters are not well informed on international relations and international
Reporters who come here or people that you're interacting with?
Generally in the print, what I read and what I watch on television, I find the reporters themselves are often not well informed because they have been shifted from one beat to another, and they are not specialists, for example, on the beat that they are covering. Like, for example, foreign policy, I would say, is a specialist beat, just like, say, for example, economic affairs would be a specialist beat.
Yeah, that's a problem, because no one is willing to pay for their news. Ask anyone would they like to pay for a newspaper. Where does the money come from? From salaries. Ads also are now diminishing, right? So papers that could afford to have a foreign correspondent in every country have cut back considerably. All of you all are part of the disease, because you all want free information. You all don't want to pay for information. Information is not free. There's someone like me who has to be supported, who has to be, if I have to fly abroad and do something and understand it, I need to spend close to 20 lakhs even just for a simple trip, right? If I have to spend 3 weeks in a country and work and understand and talk to people and develop that expertise, who has the investment to invest in that kind of money? In which paper? The giant newspapers of the past used to have. Even New York Times has now cut down on its foreign correspondence. They rely on agency journalism. So there is a general deterioration across because of the problem. And that is compounded with universities and the general quality dropping. I can counter-reverse the question and say, if all these are postgraduate students, how much do they really know about international relations? Okay? I can counter-reverse it. If journalists are unpurred on a lot of these things, how much is a class that is really studying it, going beyond their class? That you all have to think about. You know, it's your lives. You can spend 3 years just looking at your books and doing that and even get 95% and move out as a topper. But hell, if you don't read what is relevant, forget it, guys. You're not going to go far. I can tell you that. I'm sorry to say that so bluntly. But you're just one of the mill. Brilliance is never chance. Excellence is never chance, isn't it? Maybe, yeah, there's a genius that is born, one in a billion, who just sails through everything. Everybody else goes through hard work and understanding issues and boiling it down and making it simple. And I think the genius lies in taking complex issues and making them simple. Okay? I think that's the genius, is to break down all this information that is hitting you and say, okay, what does this all add up to? Okay, what does it all mean? Instead of saying, oh, I've written, I used to study international relations myself in college. And there used to be all this gunboat diplomacy, and they're all so distant. All these terminologies that people use to describe how things would be. Today we didn't have the advantage of having multimedia, where I could go in and now if I wanted to study anything, I could search, get that particular thing, know what happened. So if I want to know what happened in 9/11, I can see every single detail of it, right? Which means that y'all are losing a great opportunity if you're not immersing yourself and understanding what's happening, okay? If you all think that this is all restricted to classrooms and this is just, I need to get the marks, sorry, you're not going to get very far. Okay.
And we have another. Shall we take
Okay.
3 questions and then
Sure.
go back? Aaron, Kajin, there's some there. And then we have a second round, perhaps?
Sure.
Okay, good.
So it was lovely listening to you. I'll just take forward what Professor Mohsin asked. Essentially, what my question is, you're right when you say that it becomes very important for us to be interested, to subscribe to newspapers and stuff. The problem is, we need the material. Unless we have the material, why would we end up buying it? And that is exactly where the question comes into place, which Professor Mohsin asked. When we're not getting the first-hand information which we could have got, had news agencies, broadened their perspective and covered international affairs, the country per se will not be interested in it, because at the end of the day, all of us must agree to one fact, that it is the media which is molding the mind of the country. And if we as students are failing, we as a country are failing to look ahead of what is just happening within the country, be it the petty politics or some issues which are absolutely irrelevant, then somewhere, somehow, don't you think that the media is also failing at its own duty?
Okay, next. The chicken and egg question, anyway.
This is from the teacher's point of view, and
Sure.
I am into the
Sure.
this whole business. I would just like to get your understanding, because your experience is vast. How to remove prejudices from the narratives, because narrative really builds the prejudices among the students who are in a very tender age to develop their notions, their opinion. So how to really remove that, because you have seen it. And second aspect is that how relevant are strategic partnership for India, because we have signed more than 30 of them, the last being with Saudi Arabia in the foreign policy discourse. Thank you.
Okay. Who's next?
So as you said, that India does not have Al Jazeera and all that. But what if, like, the Republic turns out to be like an Indian Al Jazeera? So especially for a country like India, which is growing, what all impact can such a world media can have, such a famous media center, and how can it impact the foreign policy, not of only India but other countries?
Okay.
How can it change the opinion?
Should we answer
And
these 3?
no, you can ask.
So I wanted to ask about, so we have a lot of movements coming up, social movements, not only in India but abroad also.
This way I can eat my sandwich. Yeah, I'm listening.
And international movements coming up. If our coverage broadens from only Indian perspective to an international perspective, what sort of determination or capability do we have to actually make an impact on that, and how much of these movements make an impact on our media?
Okay. Anybody else?
So my basic question is, what is the role of media in taking note of the responsibility of media for the awareness? Let's take an example that Indians are not aware of what's happening in Latin America. In fact, we don't know how many countries constitute in Latin America. Isn't it media's responsibility to aware us in keeping aside the business?
Keeping you, sort of?
Keeping aside the business and the interest of youth.
Okay. Anybody else? Yeah.
Like, talking about what the Indian, basic viewer looks forward is to something that highlights, right? And you're talking about India's confused facade of neutrality that is going on to these days is shaking hands with each and every country, which later, does not exactly please or, actually interest the Indian viewer. So isn't it a sort of discrepancy inside the presentation of the existing facts that are already there in the media as well?
Meaning what? I didn't...
As in, see, we can talk about the latest Russian Pakistan military exercise, or for that matter, you know, UNSC reform resolutions, which was actually drafted by India, and later Russia was the one who actually went forward and lobbied against it. But I mean, all these are very, very interesting issues that can actually come to the light of Indian public. But then at the end of the day, very hardly, I mean, one or at the very max two of them actually come up in the you know, news channels, or for that matter even newspapers, which are actually very, very nicely highlighted. So isn't it a discrepancy inside the Indian media to show off this presentation in such a way that pleases the eye of the Indian viewer?
Yeah.
So you said that leadership is very important in foreign policy
Yeah.
and foreign relations. So my question is, both Mr. Modi and Mr. Trump, they have a very huge presence on social media. I mean, I think Mr. Trump would put it on Twitter before he even tells the journalists. All the foreign policy, if he doesn't like somebody from China, he'll say nasty guy, and we know already how he thinks on Twitter. So is the journalist also...
It's called Twitter diplomacy.
Yeah, it's Twitter diplomacy. So do you think the leaders have also influenced in a way how we ourselves are informed and how the media can really influence?
Maybe they influenced you, or you influenced them. Okay. Anybody else? Yeah.
Just a question which is the opposite of what you've been saying. We've been pointing out that we don't buy newspapers and so on, and therefore there is a revenue model, which means many things we should know don't come from the newspapers. But by the same token, there are those who got a lot of money, who control the media, give advertising and so on, and then therefore they hide a lot of stories. So is that also a danger?
Okay. Go ahead. Hi.
My question is with respect to the international media, more than just restricting the scope to India. So if you look at humanitarian conflicts, issues that we're seeing arising in, say, the Middle East, or even our neighbors with the Rohingya massacre, we see that journalism that covers these issues specifically has reduced drastically as opposed to what they would have been during times of the Vietnamese War, like the war in Vietnam. So is it also a situation where journalists aren't being respected as much in times of, like, in situations of crisis? Because we do have so many cases of journalists themselves being attacked in war zones. So is that the reason, or why is there such a huge lack of coverage in these areas of humanitarian conflict?
Okay. That's it. No other questions? Okay, good. I've had my... Is there someone who can get me a hot coffee? Yeah? Anyway, no, don't bother. Don't bother. If you have to get up, don't bother. Okay. First one is the media failing? Someone said that, right? You said it. You forgot your question. What's your name?
Yeah, Ari.
See, he was looking at WhatsApp, tweet. He's already out of the subject. He's tuned out. Okay, all right.
That would be my next question. So basically my question was on these lines.
Let me answer your first question.
Yeah, I'm repeating my first question. My first question
No, I know what your question was. You said that isn't the media responsible for failing as much as what irked you all? Yeah, what irked you all about the fact that I said you all are failing? So then you all came right back and said, no, you're failing. On this one. Right? There are actually a set of people who've almost asked somewhat the same questions about it. Right? Look, I think to answer philosophically and in a larger context, and some of that will also answer the questions that people had asked, okay, is that what kind of nation are we? Okay. If you look at the history of India, were we an aggressive nation? Were we a nation that only was insular in its approach? If it ever went outside, did we colonize any nations? Did we see benefit in developing relations? Or what was our approach? I mean, that's interesting for you all to look at. If you're studying contemporary Indian political or foreign policy or economic behavior, the past is a good example, just like your past would be, right? In some senses. A person's also built by his past as he moves into the future. So study that firstly. The second question is, second perspective that comes from is, post-independence, what kind of nation have we been? So if you see, we were hard focused on development. we became insular because of the policies we believed that as a country we shouldn't be dependent on other countries for major things. Because we felt that 300 years of colonization or Mughal rule or whatever rule had stripped us of our technology, had made use of us as a raw material source, like any other colonized country, which you can name and see. And therefore, the Industrial Revolution missed us. And we never got any of the great benefits. So the first 50 years of this country was built only in what was believed to be self-reliance, nation building, maybe first 40 years. So the need for foreign policy came only when it was a question of one, negotiating with, say, someone like Soviet Union to get technology transfers that suited us without commitments, because America said you're either with us or against us. There was a policy decision. We were not an export-oriented country. We believed everything should be made within the country. So Made in India was a slogan that Mr. Modi didn't come up with. It was Mr. Nehru who believed that the commanding heights of the economy must be built within India. Right? So by nature, India was not an aggressor. Historically, it was an insular country. It was inward-looking. It was not a great shipping power, except if you look back, way back in the, maybe in the first, just before BC and AD, when we colonized, or actually culturally colonized Southeast Asia and spread religion across the religions that grew from here, Buddhism and others to others. But we were never aggressive countries that wanted to conquer, to dominate, to build. So if you look at the history of the way India's worked, I mean, you can look at for every country. The current composition, the way it then breaks is till about 1990, till the liberalization process happened, the economic liberalization, India was insular. It believed that everything should be built in India. Foreign relations was a matter of moral support to NAM. We believed, we didn't go with what we called realpolitik or selfish national interests. We presented ourselves as the Pope that would arbitrate on all big issues, irrespective of whether by arbitrating it affected our relations. So we supported South Africa and gave them all the black African countries, gave them support for their freedom struggles, but wanted nothing in return. Never said, I'm giving you this much money, now give me back this much, or give me something for that thing. It was it was not transactional. It was kind of a Nehruvian philosophy of being the moral force, the third world philosophy, right? That began to change when economic liberalization happened and began to get more aggressive as we began to be an outward-looking country dependent on exports for our growth. And part of that boom came when the IT sector, which is now under trouble because of the H-1B visa, began to export its services across. When the whole business of business process outsourcing, that you would become the back office to the world, for the first time, services exports exceeded goods exports. Otherwise, we're great exports of metal or gold or jewelry or diamonds, but suddenly our export revenues apart, and of course, we were great people who exported our services in terms of our diaspora, who then contributed to the economy, which still is the largest export earner. So we moved from a completely restricted economy to an export-oriented or partially export-oriented, not like America freedom. When we began to then understand that a lot of these relations are important for us in terms of trade, in terms of getting international support, whether it was big trade regulations began to affect us. WTO began to have its impact on how we dealt with our own thing. No more could we live in isolation and put up barriers. If we had to lower our barriers, we had to deal with other countries. So the reporting and the media began to change with it. From stories of valor and moral uprightness, it moved to a more aggressive, realpolitik, national interests, which will determine our foreign policy interests. Okay? So reporting in a lot of senses then began to move in that direction, which was that a lot of countries, like the Gulf countries, where the boom began in the 80s. So our initial survey of that was, if you see all the Indian papers wrote a lot about the Gulf boom, which took in the 80s. Then the 90s, the big opening out and the export and the reduction of licenses. So cars came, scooters came. Your Papa's generation would have prospered under that, right? Where the refrigerator was earlier in the living room, and you boasted to everybody that I'm offering you fridge water, cold water. Today, every young kid who gets married has a refrigerator already, and nobody even looks at it. It's like part of the furniture, right? Where the middle class prospered and boomed. And suddenly there was a very, very prosperous middle class comparatively growing. That middle class began to drive a lot of the interests. So domestic travel, for instance, all of you all have gone for holidays, right? You'll be interested in knowing that a lot of coverage began to go around areas of interest. If there was development issues in the past, a lot of the issues that we wrote about was on water shortages, on what's happening to agriculture.
Even palm oil.
Palm oil
Palm
exports.
oil was
These became big issues. So it might be, you see, in a nice argumentative way, you could make like a debating point, brownie point to say, oh, but media is not doing its job, right? But I think you have to look at it in the larger context of how interest develops and how the media with its limited resources will follow that. In terms of, say, as you were mentioning, a palm oil battle happens with Indonesia, Malaysia, or whatever it is. They import oil, or we import that oil here. It affects our farmers who say, look, I'm growing it, my prices have crashed, I'm getting nothing. But at that price, the Indian middle class doesn't want to pay for palm oil. Plus, there's a shortage of oil. So there's a dilemma. So the government sorts it out by saying, all right, this much will be protected, this will be the price. You cannot crash the domestic market. The same thing with agriculture exports and imports. Now, for instance, if you all studied, because you're in the state of Haryana, the minimum support price, every time you read the mandis that you go to, they talk about it, right? That is a protected thing, that if the price drops below this, the government will step in to buy. It's not free market. So a lot of the debate and discussion is on very important domestic subjects that have a bearing, whether you notice it or not, on foreign policy. The export of basmati as an output of agriculture. The export of fruits, that is also foreign policy. You all tend to think of foreign policy in terms of writing about nations, but actually foreign policy is all about national interest being pushed outside. Okay? And the debate on that national interest. So if you study Indian media and you study the papers, you will find a lot of discussion on these matters. It's not like the media ignores these matters. Because we understand, but we break it down simply, not as large policy issues, but into issues that matter directly to our readers. So if there's a section of our readers who are interested in agriculture exports, whether we're exporting coffee, whether we're exporting tea, whether we're exporting rice, whether we're exporting chemicals, pharmaceuticals, all of these have an impact on us. So one writes about it. So if you see you're getting your drug prices at a cheaper rate, and we are able to then sell drugs elsewhere because of the fact that we are able to make these various prescriptions much cheaper than they do abroad because of our labor costs or whatever it is, we use that as an arbitrage that moves out and does a lot more business outside. So to look at foreign policy through the narrow confines of relations between nations or the large things would be, I think, missing or looking at it through only a tunnel vision. To say, oh, you have not covered India-Malaysian relations. But the fact is, as you were saying, we would have, over a period of time, okay. So get the perspective right. Very important to understand the context, to understand why we do what we do as a nation. That's very important, to understand why we build our relations with others. So I would say as a project, for instance, all of you all should study Say, take agriculture as a challenge. I mean, if you're doing analysis, you divide up and see how the world's business, who's protected whom, by whom. What is our market outside? I mean, if you're really serious about it, that's why I think we need a culture that goes beyond the classroom, that says, as a nation, we need certain things to happen. Today you are saying, why isn't that guy doing it? You have to ask yourself, why am I not doing it? Because you are the 5% privileged lot that study in great universities or places, the onus lies on you all. Okay? Parents might have sent you all, but you are now on the cusp of contributing phenomenally to this country. If you all took the interest, if you all began to study each of these things in far more detail, and then ask the question, what can I do? How can I change things? So if you're interested, if I take the analogy of agriculture, study what's happening around you. Study the practices. Study the technology. Study who has better technology. Studies what will cost us for the technology. After all, what is technology? It's seeds. Who has better seeds? What is our current yield with wheat? Which country has a better yield? Can I get that wheat here? At what price and what will be the cost in terms of agriculture? Will I bring in pests as our PL 480 wheat program happened? What happens to that? What is the kind of fertilizer or the new genetics, gene splicing that I can do? Why is there such a big battle about genetically modified foods? That's an international and foreign policy issue. Okay? Because Monsanto wants to sell seeds to us. We are resisting and saying, hello, no. You can't do this because our farmers will be dependent. Is that correct? Have you understood the argument? Then you look at where all can the entire problem of Indian containerization. The fact that you have fruits and vegetables that are grown here but don't reach Delhi, which has a huge market. Not able to sell to Dubai, to Middle East. Desert countries that may want your fruit, like Brazil has done so successfully. The banana is a Brazilian banana most of the time. You go to an American store and you get these large bananas. Why is India, which is as much a tropical country, not able to export like Brazil does? Is that a foreign policy issue or a domestic issue? Who's going to sort it out? The babus or you? Or you don't give a damn? Isn't it? We all have to come together to understand that you are in a privileged position of changing a nation, of understanding what a nation's about, of being serious about it, of then influencing that change. Because you might think the others are doing the thinking, but many others might just be doing what has been done in the past. I was talking to Vishal Sikka, who is the Infosys chief, who got into trouble for whatever reasons with his board. And he had a very interesting definition of innovation. And by the way, innovation is going to be our biggest foreign policy export. So I'm not speaking this in an abstract manner. He says innovation is the ability where all of us are sitting in the same room, but you as a person can see something different. Everyone's noticing the same things about the room, this. But someone out there says, wow, I've understood it, this is the difference, and then begins to monetize it. All the great guys, whether Facebook or any of the great icons of this generation, happened because of a great idea, which was obvious to everybody, but they spotted it. Right? So Zuckerberg or whoever says, look, all these guys are interested in exchanging their personal pictures. How do I connect? Becomes a great idea. Happening in front of everybody else. You are sharing, those so-and-so sharing with the same phone, pushing the picture, doing it. He says, hello, why don't we just network? So does Ola, so does Uber. The great ideas come through innovation. So again, there I think it's for a country to be deeply, it must first understand that it wants to be number one beyond its own, firstly for its own self. In the quest for number one, in the quest to fulfill what we have as an obligation under our constitution to feed every Indian, how could you, as individuals here, sitting here in this university, think that 50% of this country does not get water. Right? Another 50% are defecating on the streets. You see it every day. And just look at housing. How many people have shelter over their heads, like you have? And what are you doing about it? And what is the solution for that? I'm not saying you go out there tomorrow and do NGO work and all that stuff. I'm not saying that. I'm saying there are fundamental issues that have foreign policy implications, not in the way you look at it. You have a leverage. We all have a leverage. If you're able to translate that and see what business it is, you then hook up. So if you say, I want technology transfers, then I'm going for that. If I want to export, I see where the shortages are in those places, and I make it better, and I like my IT engineers and professionals, I do it better. Okay? Then you have to be a country that believes, if you really want a strong foreign policy media, as I say, you get a good of government as you deserve. You get as good a media than you deserve. If you're not interested, why should I be interested? If you're interested in Rihanna or whoever's baby, I'll give you that, no? Because I'm getting this thing. By the way, the amount of money that you spend in a newspaper, just to give you an example, must be, you don't know the price of a newspaper, right? It's 4 rupees, 5 rupees. What do you do with, how much does a burger cost?
40 rupees at McDonald's.
So, who's giving you more value for money or for this thing? You get the world at your doorstep for $5. You won't look at it. But the first chance you want to have a Coke, you'll go and buy it. Take magazines. The average price of a magazine in India today is 60 rupees. Why wouldn't you want to pick it up? $50, man. I go and eat a burger and I'm done with. And this will last me for a week. So it's actually, you divided it 5 rupees a day, or less than that, if you subscribe for everything. So again, there you come to the, I think, the crux of the, and I'm not looking at you. I'm just sort of, I'm addressing all the questions that came. Don't think I, focused on your question. I think I've covered a lot of the questions that were posed, these 10 questions that were there, which again comes to, why don't, can we do an Al Jazeera and be, if you constitute 2% of the world trade, why the hell should anyone want to know India's opinion? Please tell me. Would you listen to India? Firstly, the Indians itself. Why would you want to know? Why would America want to know what your opinion is? Man, you don't count in international trade. What have you got to give me? Would you be interested in knowing from a 4th standard student what international relations is about? Please ask the question. That's what you are in the world of politics. Man, you're a 4th standard guy in international trade. 2%. It's like, I'm a 98% topper, and I'm coming to ask you, hello, let me know what you think about foreign policy when you're 4%. Just think about it. So, to get to that point, in terms of prejudices and narratives, I think someone asked that question. Sure, a lot of biases prevail and we are responsible. The media is responsible. But I think over a period of time, credibility is very important. So it's just like personal friendships. If I say the girl next to you says, so-and-so got 50 marks only out of 100. And when you go up there and you see she's actually got 80 and she didn't give you the right figure, would you trust her the next time for information? Right? A magazine or media rests on credibility. If you break that credibility, it's like a person losing their credibility. You will not come back to rely on it. So a magazine or newspaper or television has, perforce over a period of time, be objective, ensure that a lot of people say, hey, or you project yourself as an opinion paper. I'm, carrying an opinion. So everyone knows you're not parading and saying that I'm an objective individual, which is fine. There are a lot of opinion papers that go with it. So that is very important in any of the things that we do, is credibility in all your personal lives. Think about it. You lose credibility, your reputation's gone. You can have all the money in your world, right? But if you don't have credibility, if you don't have, why is value system so important? Money can't buy that value system. It's your character that determines how people look at you, that you're truthful all the time, that you're willing to stand up and speak. That kind of credibility comes only when, and that trust means that you'll come back to me every day and buy my newspaper or buy my magazine every week or watch my television show. So we are dependent. By the way, the cost to produce India today is close to 120 rupees per copy. You buy it at 60 rupees because we discount it. The 60 rupees we make up through advertising. Okay? So you're getting a bargain. In all media, you're getting a great bargain. You're not paying the actual price for what it costs to produce that information. Prejudice comes because if you agree to pay 120 bucks to me, then I'm free and independent. No advertiser can influence my coverage. Isn't it? It also works the other way. Okay. Neutrality, I think we've dealt with that on the credibility issue, media responsibility and interest. I said, it depends on how you look at it, the perception. Yes, I'm not saying we are the greatest. We have a long way to go, and there are all kinds of bad apples also, so it's not something that we'd want to do. Social media and the diplomacy, leadership role that someone is talking about, yeah, increasingly, that's for foreign policy experts to do it. But if we are conducting conversations on Twitter, why can't leaders do it? What makes them so formal? They're probably doing it better, smarter, communicating through more people through this form. So why not you? If you're doing it to broadcast your messages, why can't he do it? Except he has to do it a little more responsibly, but he gets across to the world pretty quickly. So I think it's an accepted form to understand. Even Mr. Modi tweets a lot, and each of them have billions of followers. It's a great way for leaders to keep in touch. It's got nothing to do with foreign policy. It's just how you keep in touch with people, and foreign policy is something that happens along the way with it. Okay, and Vietnam War and why we don't cover subjects of this thing. And journalists are not interested. Yeah, again, it has to impact our country, right? Otherwise, I'm still back to being the Pope. So I must understand why what is happening in Myanmar bothers me. How does it come across to my country? All right, one is a human rights issue. Sure, I mean, one is not saying don't join issue and say this thing, but are you really worried about what's happening in your own country? Do you think that all those people living in poverty are really having all their rights? I'm not saying these are equal, but I'm saying, why isn't anybody interested in knowing? There was a fascinating course which I did with Amartya Sen. I was an Nieman Fellow at Harvard University. And he did a course called Hunger in the Modern World. And his answer, and his thesis is this, is that the reason why there are no starvation deaths in India, no great famines in India, is because the press is highly active in India. If there's one death of someone dying because they didn't have food, it would be highlighted and reported. He then took the analogy of China in the 60s, when over 5 million people died because of starvation, but no one knew about it, because the Chinese media was completely suppressed.
Even for that sake, when the college students were burned and all of that, it wasn't covered internationally.
You're talking of the Tiananmen Square? Or
Yeah.
So whatever. I mean, there was highly restricted access. Now, his thesis, which is a very interesting thesis, and we must all reflect on it. He says, the reason why we remain hungry as a nation, almost 60% of our people barely get 1 square meal a day. They go to bed hungry every night, right? The reason why that happens is you're not interested anymore. You're interested if one person dies of starvation, and then you'll go and say, oh, I'm so sorry about it, and you write about it. But if the rest of the people live in quiet hunger, it's never reported because it's boring. You'll say, yeah, but I know it, no? Yeah, how long can you keep telling me that so-and-so is hungry? So what? Isn't it? Over a period of time, it doesn't matter to you. If I say that that person is going out to defecate in the open, you'll say, yeah, I see it every day on the train when I take this train to this thing. What's so big about it? Have you thought how serious that is? Have you thought that we as a nation had promised our people long, long back that we would give them everything that was there, that was equal to all of us? Think about that. So I'm saying, not to answer, I'm not saying that these are not important or these issues are not significant and India should write about human rights violations in other places, in Syria, in refugee crisis. I'm not eliminating any of these. But I'm just saying also turn a little bit of that inwardly and ask, are we being truly aware of what's happening in this country and why things are happening right under us when we have all the powers and wherewithal for us to actually make a difference in each other's lives? Okay, with that I think it's 5:30 and thanks very much.
Very much, Dr. Raj Chengappa. We had the pleasure to meet at the school summit last month, organized by India Today, in a panel that we were discussing the leaders of the future and how to build global classrooms. And today we are talking with the future leaders. And I would like to end with a quote from Dr. Chengappa, which is why we build
I just want to say I'm not doctor, I'm just Raj.
Raj.
Okay, sorry.
Why we build relations with other. We need a culture to do things instead of asking it is not being, why it's not being done, how can we do it? How can we do things differently? So thank you very much.
Thank you. It's a pleasure talking to all of you. Thank you.